I'm Raza Naqvi, and in this next half hour, we will bring you some of the stories of those most deeply touched by the events of September 11th. From the neighborhoods of New York to the small towns in the American heartland, this solemn anniversary is being remembered as a time to reflect on our security and strength of spirit. In the decades since the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001, New York City has faced other terrorist plots as well as economic upheaval. Yet it has continued to rebuild, attracting new residents and more than 40 million tourists each year. As Carolyn Weaver reports, New Yorkers like to think of themselves as a tough bunch.
New York City seems much the same as it did 10 years ago. Times Square still bustles with people and cars. Fifth Avenue still beckons. And the Statue of Liberty still offers an iconic welcome in New York Harbor. But the emptiness in the skyline where the Twin Towers once stood is different, a reminder of what has changed. New Yorkers Jenn, Jaffe, and Adam Sills, parents of one-year-old Isaac, say they rarely think about the attacks, even though New York remains a likely target for terrorists. They are committed to their culturally diverse neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Hi there, sweetie. You look so happy. I like being part of this community. I like being part of this city. And I love the people. I just like the diversity and the vibrancy. And I like going down the street and hearing 4 different languages.
Sills says he's proud that New Yorkers quickly recovered after the attacks.
It sort of confirmed the image of the city that it's always had, which is sort of as a tough and resilient place. That we're able to take on sort of, large challenges, come what will down the pike. People have this amazing ability to absorb it, and not only absorb it, but kind of even sort of rise above the thing.
It's interesting because New York responded very differently to September 11th than did the rest of the country.
Columbia University psychology professor George Bonanno studies grief and collective trauma. He says research shows New Yorkers recovered more quickly than other Americans.
Now, compared to the rest of the country, anxiety and generalized distress was high in the rest of the country for several years after 9/11. All over this, really, on large scale, all over the country. And that was not really the case in New York.
Yet some New Yorkers are still deeply affected. Yudelka Cepeda is a paralegal with a New York law firm.
Even when we preview the images from 9/11, I feel like I want to cry still, and like my heart is broken. Like still now when I'm talking to you, I feel like I want to cry because of the memories and things like that. It was hard.
Cepeda likes living in the Bronx near her extended family. She says she loves New York, but she does not feel safe. She is anxious about her 13-year-old daughter, Alexandri.
I want to go to a low-key or low-profile city and where there's no subways and tall buildings, because I think New York City holds too much attention, especially terrorists.
Cepeda worries that mass transit is most vulnerable. She wishes that Alexandri did not have to take the subway to school.
I fear a lot that something might happen to her, and I won't be there to protect her, basically.
Others see no point in worrying. Adam Sills says marriage and fatherhood make him, if anything, more committed to New York.
Having your world centered there and including something like raising a family there is in a way the ultimate statement of I think this is a special and I think this is an important place, and it's so special and so important that why would that make me reconsider having children or having family there in the first place.
He is far from alone. 1 million more people are expected to move to New York in the next 20 years. They will become part of a city that lives in the present and the future, far more than in the past. Carolyn Weaver, VOA News, New York.
10 years after terrorists attacked the United States, some Americans are still shocked at what happened. Shocked that terrorists flew planes into buildings in New York and Washington. Shocked that they killed some 3,000 people. Shocked that 3 of the 4 terrorist pilots trained at flight schools here in the U.S. One of those flight schools is out of business, and the owner is out of money. VOA's Carolyn Presutti tells us his story.
Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shihi were at the controls of the 2 planes on September 11, 2001, the 2 that crashed into the World Trade Center. This is the man who ran the flight school that trained both of them for 6 months, Rudi Dekkers, a Dutch citizen who has lived here since 1993. He's flying us in a 4-seat Cessna 172, just like the one that Atta and Al-Shihi trained on at Dekkers Flight School here in Florida.
Clear for takeoff.
Dekkers is taking us on the same flight training path along the Atlantic Ocean. It's the first time he's flown the route in 8 years, so a flight instructor sits next to him.
This is the bridge to the left, and this is the airport here.
The southwestern Florida skies were the training grounds for 3 of the 4 pilots. It's thought that they chose this area because of the flat ground and the fact that the coastline can be used for navigation.
We always went 10 miles out of the area, and this is a very quiet area. So they did the stalls here, the steep turns. They're all practicing.
Dekkers saw these two every day. He still has their applications, their test scores, and student visa papers. Even Atta's signature on his pilot license.
Atta was always very by himself, didn't talk too much, didn't like to talk to us, but I'll see he did.
They were very much like many other foreign students, except, Dekkers says, they were disrespectful and inattentive. After his chief instructor warned they might be expelled, Atta and Al-Shihi's attitudes improved. But what his company trained them to do unraveled his life, his fortune, and his business.
That's where was my airline office and maintenance building over there, but that's, nothing is mine anymore.
At 4 a.m., the day after the terrorist attacks, FBI agents entered Dekkers' office. It was in this building at the time. They confiscated his files and computers. Immigration officials questioned him about these student visa applications. He testified before Congress. Florida charged him with fraud, then dropped the charges. His business and marriage collapsed.
That brought so much stress, lost financially everything. I was worth $12 million on paper, and after a year after 9/11, I was worth $46,000.
Dekkers blames the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden. He's written a book about his experience called Guilty by Association. If he had a flight school today,
I would not have Muslim students.
Dekkers says his once successful life is now gone.
When you lose your dream, when you lose all your money, I lived on the beach in Naples. I had to sell the house. I lost everything. But I'm still here.
But some 3,000 others are not. Rudi Dekkers says he's a survivor, and that's the story he wants to tell.
Carolyn Presutti brings us back to New York with a story about how a woman's life was permanently changed with the loss of her brother. Now she channels her emotions into a performance about freedom and tells us about her brother's tragic connection to the iconic image of the Twin Towers.
Actress Gwendolyn Briley-Strand
if you stop,
performs
you die.
And is transformed
Wade in the water
into Civil War heroine Harriet Tubman.
Freedom is a hard-bought thing. It demands a high price.
Briley-Strand knows that herself. Her brother Jonathan Briley died in the World Trade Center when terrorists attacked on September 11th, 10 years ago.
The passion that has taken on a life of its own with me is to want Americans to not take America for granted.
Jonathan Briley worked as an audio technician on the top of the World Trade Center, 107 floors up. He was a religious man. Earl Leach became a Baptist deacon the same day as Briley, 6 months before 9/11.
The relationship I think that Jonathan had with Jesus Christ, his Lord and Savior, is that I don't think he felt any pain. I think God reached in and took him right out, just like that.
From that day, photos of terror's aftermath. Difficult to view, yet mesmerizing. This Associated Press image became the iconic picture of the day. An unknown man's desperate, final decision. It wasn't until 5 years later that some connected a name to the falling man photo. Jonathan Briley. Same goatee, same black sneakers, same height, nearly 2 meters tall, but nothing definite.
It's just an outrageous. It's something.
Briley-Strand can't explain it. She says her family received a body back from the coroner from a fall of more than 100 floors.
I know what I know, and I'm not going to second guess the miracle that God gave me. And who's to say that God didn't catch him and set him down?
Subsequent photos saw the falling man's white shirt tearing away, revealing an orange T-shirt. Briley-Strand says another brother remembers Jonathan had an orange T-shirt. She doesn't. In this memorial, 109 steel beams intertwine to represent each of the victims who lived in Westchester County, New York. It's called The Rising, after Bruce Springsteen's song about a 9/11 firefighter. Jonathan Briley's plaque reads, "God's love and our love for you is eternal. Miss you always." We may never know the true identity of the falling man. Perhaps he's all of us, all of humanity, victim to what terrorism brought to the world that day, in September, 10 years ago. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News.
New York City, Washington, and a field in Pennsylvania experienced the main impact of the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001. But in a world linked by mass communications, Americans far from the scene, in small towns and rural back roads, also felt shock, anger, and grief. VOA's Greg Flakis reports from NACOGDOCHES in East Texas.
Shop clerk and singer-songwriter Cindy Grayson lives here in Nacogdoches partly because she likes being away from the stress of big cities. She follows the news, but the wars and strife seem far away.
Part of you does feel like it's happening way over, it's still over there because we're so, I don't know, this is a whole nother world here in Nacogdoches.
Still, she says the terror attacks 10 years ago brought fearful events closer to home. So when the space shuttle Columbia broke apart over East Texas in 2003, dropping debris over the town and on her property, she thought at first it was a terrorist attack.
With the house shaking and everything, my first reaction was that they'd blown up someplace in Dallas or they'd blown up Houston. And we were just getting the vibration of it.
Many of Nacogdoches' 30,000 citizens feel a personal connection to America's war on terrorism. Carolyn Adams has 2 sons in the U.S. military. She thinks U.S. operations in Afghanistan and the killing of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan have reduced the terrorist threat.
With him out of the way, I don't think he got followers, we know that. But I think just getting him out of the way helped.
Retired physician Carroll Gregory laments all the death and suffering in the wars and wonders if they really have protected the nation.
I still worry that it could happen again because I'm not sure we're safer.
One of the people in charge of keeping people safe in Nacogdoches is Police Sergeant Gregory Sowell. He says Nacogdoches is better protected than ever before because of financial grants from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security.
We have more equipment now than we ever dreamed of having, sophisticated equipment for a town this size, and we've actively pursued these grants.
Sowell says the federal grants help towns in East Texas work together on an emergency network that can respond to any kind of disaster.
These plans and these resources were exercised in Nacogdoches, Texas during Hurricanes Rita and Ike.
For the most part, life here is slow and easy. Even the emotional impact of that terrible day 10 years ago has eased, says Archie McDonald, a history professor at Stephen F. Austin University in Nacogdoches.
The majority of people, if they didn't stop and do the arithmetic, couldn't automatically tell you if it's 9 or 12 or whatever it is. But when we get more to it, when we get on the date, they'll focus on it more and there'll be some kind of community observance.
McDonald thinks September 11th will eventually be like other historic dates that Americans now casually observe, like Independence Day.
4th of July time now, we just all have a party. We're not remembering the fact that a lot of people died, because of what had happened 235 years ago.
Piece of the old and a piece of new, a little help from me.
People here continue to hope that they, their community, and their country remain safe. Greg Flakus, VOA News, Nacogdoches, Texas.
Many Americans knew little or nothing about Islam before terrorists claiming to be acting in the name of the faith carried out the September 11 attacks some 10 years ago. Some people now see Islam as a threat to American democracy, while others go out of their way to defend the rights of Muslims living here. VOA's Jerome Sokolowski reports from a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee, where a proposed mosque generated intense controversy.
Murfreesboro is a patriotic town where a Civil War battle was fought and one faith has always dominated. And yes, this is a Christian Bible in front of the historic courthouse. Across the street, lawyers are arriving for a hearing about plans for a new mosque. Local resident Susan Coyner says she used to know hardly anything about Islam.
After 9/11, I started reading everything I could get my hands on about Islam because I was truly curious at what mindset would cause people to be filled with so much hate that they would want to kill innocent people.
Now, Coyner is here to support the plaintiffs in a lawsuit. The plaintiffs at the courthouse are trying to stop the construction of a sprawling Islamic center on this plot on the outskirts of Murfreesboro. The Muslim community has grown in recent years, and they say their current location is too small. The opponent's lawyers say the local Muslim leadership has had ties to Islamic radicals abroad.
This church building may be used as an arsenal for jihad.
Imam Osama Balul says that's not true.
This piece of land is a dream for the Muslim community in Murfreesboro. We plan to have here a prayer hall, which we consider mosque, and we'll have a multi-purpose area, and we'll have a big swimming pool for the girls. They are really excited about that.
The municipality approved the project, but then a nationwide controversy erupted last year over plans for an Islamic center near the former site of the World Trade Center in New York. In addition to the lawsuit, Balul says the construction site was struck by vandals and arsonists. Dima Spinati, who leads youth activities for the Murfreesboro Mosque, says many of these American-born children got their first taste of bigotry.
And they'll come and ask me, why does my friend, call me like terrorist, or why does my mom's friend not let her see her friends, and I can't go to her friend's house, and why can't that happen?
Many Muslims say they came to Murfreesboro because it's a nice place to raise a family. On Main Street and all over downtown, the easygoing way of life is evident. Kevin Fisher is a plaintiff in the lawsuit against the mosque.
This is a very loving community. The question becomes, is this going to be something that's going to radically change this community? You look at Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan, and you say to yourself, I don't want my community to be like that.
Dearborn, Michigan is known nationwide for its large Arab Muslim population. But not everyone here worries that Murfreesboro will become Dearborn South.
In the Christian tradition, the Apostle Paul reminds us that Christ is the center of creation.
This Protestant church in Murfreesboro is hosting a show of solidarity with local Muslims. Lucinda Nelson is the church's director of music and worship.
I personally felt that it was just a shame that people can't proclaim their faith in an open and joyful way in this town or anywhere.
Muslims say they've lived in Murfreesboro for decades without problems, even after the September 11th attacks. Reverend Nelson says many people didn't even realize Muslims were living here before the controversy. She says mosque opponents are playing on residents' fear of the unknown.
They look around, they see the world changing. They see a president who doesn't look like them. And they are afraid that their way of life, their religion, the way that they believe is going to be swept away somehow.
Since September 11th, some Americans have come to believe that Islam is a danger that must be fought in court. But others are convinced that people of all faiths must overcome the fear of change in the name of religious freedom. Jerome Sokolovsky, VOA News, Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
The attack on the World Trade Center's Twin Towers in New York 10 years ago not only destroyed the skyscrapers, it changed the character of life in the surrounding neighborhood. In the past decade, the area has evolved from a business-oriented past to a family-friendly enclave. But for one family business, it will never be the same.
Stephanie Hritskovyan is the daughter of a Ukrainian immigrant who owned the BLACKMAN Deli, a thriving family business that served office workers from the Twin Towers for a quarter century. Osama bin Laden's terrorist attack devastated her life.
When the president said that they got Osama, I sat there crying. Because I was so happy they got that. Because he ruined our lives.
Hritskovyan's deli went from making $25,000 a week profit to nothing.
We were sitting pretty before that. After that, that all disappeared.
The deli folded, and the location is now occupied by a Bank of America ATM center. Nearby is one of the office buildings formerly served by the BLACKMAN Deli. Like many older buildings in Lower Manhattan, it was abandoned by businesses and reconverted for residential use after 9/11. The area now has 56,000 residents, more than twice the number it had 10 years ago. Luis Vasquez is among the newcomers.
Today, the financial district has the highest concentration of households with children in the city.
So many that the New York Times dubbed the area the diaper district. The local baby boom is hard to miss. Scores of children play in a riverfront park. Mothers push baby strollers down side streets. This one by the former BLACKMAN Deli. Jocelyn Zoland saw one of the planes crash into the World Trade Center.
It's nice to see that in the shadow of that, yes, Lauren, in the shadow of that, everything has, there are all these children and there are all these activities, and it has become a wonderful, destination. We'll see if things change, though.
Zoland says that change could include millions of tourists expected to flood the area with the completion of a 9/11 museum at Ground Zero, and tens of thousands of new office workers that will occupy Freedom Tower, a skyscraper being built to replace the Twin Towers. But the BLACKMAN Deli is gone. Many neighboring businesses remain shuttered. Stephanie Hritskovyan says what did not disappear was the deli's obligation to pay its lease through 2004 as well as taxes. Those debts cost Hritskovyan $500,000 in savings. She now rents out her home and lives with relatives.
We have no health insurance. We have no 401k. We have no retirement fund. We have nothing after 9/11.
Lower Manhattan promises to overcome the aftermath of 9/11 with more vitality than ever before. But Stephanie Hritskovyan is unemployed and still struggling to cope with the devastation of bin Laden's attacks. Peter Fedinsky, VOA News, New York.
For almost 30 years, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center graced the New York skyline. They were 110 stories high and symbolized strength and optimism. The monumental complex in Lower Manhattan was at the heart of New York's financial center. But the towers were more than that. They became a landmark of popular culture. For 3 decades, they were showcased in more than 1,000 films. For Americans and people around the world, they became an emblem of New York and the entire United States.
In 1978, the world watched as Superman, the all-American hero, brought truth and justice to Metropolis. This was the first of the Superman films, showcasing Christopher Reeve as the red-caped man of steel. New York's World Trade Center provided the background.
It summarized a certain kind of American grandeur. Not the grandeur of old, not the grandeur of tradition, because they were so new and they were so modernist in their design, but the grandeur, I would say, of sheer American powerfulness.
For years, film critic David Sterritt lived next to the Twin Towers.
I was never very fond of them architecturally. However, they certainly are large. I guess for a while they were the tallest building in the world, and it's kind of sort of an American triumphalism here. You not only build the tallest building, but you build it twice. You know.
Sterrett says the sheer size of the buildings made them hard to miss. There in the drama Wall Street, as well as in the opening shots of Brian De Palma's thriller The Bonfire of the Vanities. Both films highlighted the arrogance and greed of Wall Street in the 1980s. Mike Nichols' 1987 Working Girl also depicts the towers as a power center. But here, the towers become a symbol of women's empowerment. At the center of the story is Tess, a working-class woman from Staten Island, a ferry ride away from Manhattan. She dreams of making it in New York's financial district. She finally succeeds.
Guess where I am?
The 1979 remake of King Kong has the giant ape climbing the Twin Towers, not the Empire State Building, as in the original. But the most dramatic stunt was in 1974 by the French high-wire artist Philippe Petit. He secretly stretched a wire between the Twin Towers and walked on it for 45 minutes. The police were left to look on. The 2008 documentary, Man on Wire, captures the breathtaking stunt with photographs and original footage. It represented one man's power over the towering edifice. The towers also became linked to romance, like in the 1987 film Moonstruck, which features the steel buildings in New York nostalgia. The story centers around Loretta Castorini, an Italian-American widow who falls in love with a one-handed baker in Brooklyn, played by Nicolas Cage. In one poetic moment, a full moon shines over Loretta's quaint Brooklyn neighborhood, stirring the hearts of its Italian residents, while the towers shimmer in the background. Disaster movies also appropriated the towers. In Ronald Emmerich's Independence Day, aliens from another planet destroy, one by one, America's landmarks, including the World Trade Center.
The Twin Towers have been destroyed in various disaster movies that were made before 9/11. That became something that you couldn't do even retroactively after 9/11.
In some cases, Sterrett says, filmmakers cut out scenes that showed the towers so audiences wouldn't be upset. One example was this footage from the 2002 movie Spider-Man. Sterrett believes these cuts were patronizing, but New Yorkers have their own opinion. Here's what some at Ground Zero had to say.
You know, I lost some relatives there, so it's a sad thought for me, unfortunately.
When I see them in a movie, I think it's wonderful and I love it. And whenever we're traveling and coming across from Jersey and we look over and we don't see it, there's a big gap and we miss it.
David Sterrett says the gap is best seen in the 2002 crime drama 25th Hour by Spike Lee, a quintessential New Yorker. The camera focuses on two parallel beams of light shining up from where the towers once stood. An amputated New York, still feeling its extremities. Penelope Poulou, VOA News.
Ground Zero in New York is being rebuilt and is a symbol of hope as the nation leaves behind this solemn anniversary. Follow our coverage of September 11th, 10 years later, at voanews.com. Thank you for being with us. I'm Raza Naqvi with Voice of America.